Welcome back, guys, to the Bear and Scully podcast. With me, Sean Scullion, aka Scully, Owen Mallon, aka the Bear, Aidan, the face for radio, behind the scenes. And today we are joined with Joan Corrigan. Joan, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joe. You are now officially our longest travel guest. You've come from the Costa del Sol to be with us in rainy Cookstown. But before we get into that, Joan, we like to always know where our guests come from, where they grew up, and before we get to today's story, which involves corruption, cover-up, malpractice. But before we get into all that, let's find out a bit about Joan first.
Great. Well, thank you for having me. I am from a small village called Belnalek, near Enniskillen in Fermanagh. And I grew up on a farm and went to Mount Lourdes in Enniskillen and didn't stay in Enniskillen very long after I finished school. Went off to England and did a lot of travelling. I'm based in Spain now. Love the Spanish culture, but love coming home. And
Should have tried my Spanish. Buenos dias.
Buenos dias.
That's all he knows.
No, yeah, I'm practically fluent, but anyway. And well, you went to university, did you?
Yeah, went to university in England.
And what was your degree?
English, and I'm an English teacher at the moment. I teach online.
Right. But then you travelled about. How long were you over in England then for? Was Enniskillen the bright lights in Enniskillen wasn't big enough to keep you?
Love Enniskillen, but I had itchy feet. Went to England, went to Manchester and Edinburgh and Barcelona and South America, and then back to Northern Ireland and then back to Spain again. I think that's where I'll stay.
And what then did you go on to do yourself? Was it teaching?
Yeah, I went back to teaching English, which was I've always done either one of two things. The caring field. I have a learning disabled sister and have worked a lot with the learning disabled and the elderly and in hospitals, daycare, all the rest. And then teaching English was the thing I did when I went to Spain first. And now I'm back doing it. But I love both careers.
When you came back to Northern Ireland, you were teaching for learning disability, is that correct?
So I was in Barcelona up until 2010, the end of 2010. And at that point, I had quite a few mental health issues since I was in my late teens. And unfortunately in Barcelona, it got to a point where I had to just say, I can't hold this together anymore. So I came back to Fermanagh. Didn't think I'd stay as long as I did. I stayed up until 2019 in Northern Ireland, so was in Derry for quite a lot of that time. But yeah, I feel now finally that I'm in a good place.
Not to pray too much, but what was in Barcelona? What come to a head there with your mental health?
Just trying to juggle the stresses of life with, I suppose my Spanish wasn't great. I didn't have any talking therapy that was working. Wasn't on the right medication. Was trying to hold it together for 4 years, and then eventually something just gave. Probably, I think it was a breakup with a guy or something was the final straw.
The mild bollocks. Spaniard too, wasn't he? Fucking Elrico, boy. Get rid of him. Bad news. Hasta mañana.
So there's two sentences he knows.
So, sorry, I'm showing off my bilingual, by the way. And then the bright lights back to Enniskillen. But you were based up then, and did you get a job or you were subbing till Galvin? Was this correct?
So I worked in Enniskillen for a while with some lovely learning disabled individuals, and then went off to Derry in 2015 and started working in Galvin as an agency worker, and worked there for 4 years.
And what was your role in that? What was your day to day? What did you do?
Yeah, so care assistant.
In the actual hospital?
Yeah.
Okay.
So you're talking about feeding, toileting, helping them walk, making sure that they don't fall if they're in bed at night. There's a lot of...
It was more caring than teaching outside of it, yeah?
Yeah, I left the teaching in Spain.
Oh, yeah,
Came back, yeah.
And what then transpired as you were then in that Galvin then?
Well, previous to that, when I came back in 2010, I started thinking a lot more about my learning disabled sister, Irene, and the kind of care that she was getting. So she was then living at home with my parents, who were getting quite elderly, 70s and 80s, and had been cared for magnificently all her life at home by my mum and dad and all of us, with a lot of love and care. But I started thinking, why is she not being offered things like a befriender, for example, which I had seen when I was working in Belfast. When I was working with the learning disabled up there were certain services that I'd noticed weren't being offered to my sister, and I started asking questions. And that was my first real engagement with the Western Trust. And believe me, the following 10 plus years have been very fraught with them. But I started getting a lot of resistance, a lot of obstruction, a lot of excuses, a lot of things that didn't make sense, a lot of very flowery language and boastful language, and, basically back off in a lovely email. And then I started to have a look at how the learning disabled families were being treated in the Western Trust, and how little information was being given to them about their rights and all the services that were unmet. And compared to Belfast Trust, and I mean, the gulf in between those two is just huge. The Western Trust are at the bottom of the pit, and they have got I think maybe the worst reputation for services. And I mean, you only have to look at the Save Our Hospital over there in Enniskillen to know about the horrendous way that the service users are treated and patients. But there were little bits that started to grow, and I started to realise that engagement rights weren't being respected. Families were just being lied to. Things were being covered up. For everything that I asked for, I had to fight for it and fight for it and fight for it. It took years for her to get her autism diagnosis. I started to ask, why is my mother only getting 3 weeks of respite when she's entitled to 6? Basic little things like that. And the more, I started to open Pandora's box, and I realised that all of the things that I was asking about were basic rights that should have already been afforded to these families. And then, unfortunately, in 2015, when I was in Derry, my own mental health went really bad, and I realised that I needed to get access to certain services, and I was denied those. And then, of course, thankfully, I'm quite an assertive person, a kind of a forthright person, and I don't cower very easily to anyone. But I had to use all my strength when I was in absolute despair to try and fight for services, and had to involve Law Centre, and I send legal letters whilst I was, at times suicidal, to get the care that I needed, and fight for it when it should have been given to me. I was told, that having one of the worst times of my life, being told that I didn't meet any criteria for getting help, is like, well, if I don't meet it now, what is it that you want me to do, or what do you want me to display to persuade you that I deserve services? It was just.
Can I be blunt and ask you, at that time when you were reaching out for help, where were you? Were you suicidal? Had you thoughts of taking your life, or were you depressed, or what were these ideas you're having, and who did you reach out to that you weren't getting help from?
I went to my then doctor in Derry City Centre, and I told her how I felt, and was at the time very dissociated, which is a kind of a mechanism a lot of people with mental health issues use to just kind of zone out and not feel what they're feeling. I remember saying in an almost clinical, matter-of-fact way, I want to end my life. And she would have taken, the right follow-up steps to kind of safeguard me. But even then, there was no wraparound care. And what I learned about the high rate of suicide in Derry. Northern Ireland suicide rate, I think, is the highest in Europe. I started to realise that there are so many lives being lost due to the lack of correct services in the Western Trust. And I think that that's well known. but the Western Trust will continue to underfund, and the Department of Health will continue to underfund mental health services. So I mean, I easily could have been a suicide statistic. Thankfully, I'm here today. But given a lot of people, if I'm just trying to think, if people didn't have the kind of, I have this real fire to fight inside me, I always have. And if I didn't have that, I would certainly be dead today.
Is there a reason? Is there a reason why the Western Trust is so underfunded compared to the other areas?
I think that that this part, the Western area, is Derry City is very underfunded compared to Belfast. There's very little investment goes over to the West. I don't know the reason for that.
I think it's per capita. It's quite rural. Between Derry is probably the more densely populated in the Western, but across Enniskillen and the Lakelands and stuff like that, it's a bigger area, less population. You know. Now I know they divide the funds obviously whatever way they see, as in, you know, to provide the services per head per area, and it's not a one fit all. But the one thing me and Sean need to be very clear here is we don't have any pre-agenda with any the health trusts and stuff like that there, so we're not loading the dice, and we will ask questions to be fair, you know, to show a full explanation too, because you know, we've had people in here that they have service, the community mental health team have saved their life. They've reached out and they've saved their life. We've also had a lot of people have said the very same thing as you, that they've cried out for help for a member of their family and they didn't get it, and they're unfortunately not with us today. So there is a lot of different sides to this, and when we do stories like this, we get a lot of people that write in and say, well, that's not the experience I had, but you're speaking of your experience.
Absolutely.
And the general understanding that you've went on to receive. You've worked with the trust and you worked there. But I didn't want to pry so much on yours, but it as we go on in the story, it is important for us to know your dealings, your own personal dealings, and I know your sister's dealings, but your own personal dealings with the health trust and the miss. But did you get help from them then?
I
know you had to fight for it.
I fought for it, and then I did get the help that I needed. I wouldn't have got it without the help of the Law Centre and I, who wrote, you know, some legal letters and challenged what I believe was a horrendous.
You went on record with your GP to say that you are having thoughts of taking your own life, and at that time, and obviously you're mentally unwell. How you then had to go to a legal centre after this to receive help? That's alarming in itself to me. That's very alarming that if somebody says them words and a GP has noted that and referred that, because GPs are doing their best, but GPs are not mentally, they're not trained, they're trained for physical health. Exactly.
And what I came across in with some of the people I met in Derry who also had mental health issues, and I mean I don't know how you can get worse than suicidal. I mean, it's one of the worst places you can be with mental health, but some of these people were also self-harming and involved in very serious addictions and, you know, unable to function on a very basic level. I was just kind of walking around like a zombie, dissociated, but I saw some seriously disturbing things. And what I noticed was that there was a vicious circle happening where funds weren't going into the services that were needed. People were ending up in A&E having tried to end their life. They were being treated as scum and told that they were wasting resources and nurses' time and etc. They were being shipped back home to potentially end their life, going then to their GP saying, I need help, no help available, another suicide attempt, and so it goes. And so many of these people have ended up jumping off Foyle Bridge.
The way you're seeing this now obviously wasn't at the time. This is with hindsight. This is afterwards when you got yourself better and you start looking back at why did I have to fight that? Because so many people that have they're at that level. They are dissociated. They're not. Everything's just a blur, it's a cloud and mist of what's happening around them. No emotion, no up or down. It's just all flat. Tell me, when did you start thinking about this then afterwards? Was it afterwards you received help and you started getting better and you're like, well, why did that take so long? Or were you working with the health service as this was all happening? Or
So what happened was, thankfully, the trust decision was reversed and I was offered very good care. Okay. And I didn't intend to stay in Derry as long as I did, but I got, very involved in my own recovery of dissociation and depression and things like that. So I would have started that around 2016 and stayed on until at the end of 2018, doing that work weekly with a fantastic woman called Caroline. And I still think about her very fondly. And that kind of was the start of the beginning of the rest of my life as a healthier, more functioning, more feeling person. I'm more in touch with my emotions now and I feel more. And I will be on medication for the rest of my life and I still have online therapy weekly. But once you get that help and once your mental health is well enough for you to be able to sit down and do the work, that's when real recovery happens, when you get the right person that you trust and you're well enough to sit down and talk to them weekly and do all the work that you have to do with. It's not just 1 hour a week, it's a lot of digging and
something we talked about, me and Sean talked about this one time. We've had people on and they talk about it was nice when you mentioned Caroline's name, your face lit up and that was a person that you connected with and give you the tools to help you control and work on yourself, because sometimes I think mental health recovery is being give tools but showing the path. Nobody can walk the path for you, but they can show you tools and tips on how to care for yourself and how to get back there. But you don't always connect.
Exactly.
You don't always connect, and some people lose faith in that shit doesn't work. It's just the person. You just haven't connected with the person, but you obviously connected very much with Caroline and that helped. But I think that is important, anyone listening, that sometimes if you have want to speak to somebody and you just didn't get that feeling that you have, that connection, that it's important to maybe look about somebody else, because
I agree.
It is a very personal matchup.
I had a real clash with one. I think she was a psychologist in Enniskillen. I had a real personality clash with her, and I felt judged when I felt a coldness with her from her, and I just said, this isn't going to work. I really, don't want to see you. And her argument was, well, this is good because this is where you can deal with all of the conflict you've potentially had or uneasy feelings. And I'm like, no, it's not going to work because I don't trust you. Number one, I don't trust you with my pain. So I'm not going to open up to you. So, but adios. But
she said goodbye. I just translate for Sean. That's not bilingual like me.
We can do some Spanish subtitles.
So, look, then you've obviously you worked on yourself and you then ended up working for it's quite ironic in the case that you were, but you weren't working directly for.
No, I was working for a care agency on Western Trust property. So I was in Atnagalvin doing night shifts for most, if not all, of my time in Derry. Those 4 years. So
you had obviously conflict with the Western Trust before, with your sister and the care afforded to your parents, and then your own meeting with the care trust and your own treatment.
Yeah.
Had you still then an ongoing exchange with the Western Trust, or was that all?
No, I mean,
resolved?
I was doing quite a lot of work behind the scenes, trying to figure out where all the money's going, and I was, still advocating for families in Fermanagh and doing as much as I can to kind of, I suppose I was deeply affected by those people that I had met in Derry who had such serious mental health disorders and they weren't getting the right help. So I did quite a lot of digging, and soon enough the trust pulled out their trump card saying basically that I was sending too many emails. So for each email I would send, they would come back and refuse an answer. So I would email again and again because I'm a determined woman. So then they would use that against me and say that I was vexatious. And they would say, we have a duty to, what's their line? We have a duty to protect our employees. So in other words, you're asking us for answers. We don't want to give you those answers. You coming back and asking us a second and a third and a fourth time is annoying us. So we're going to label you vexatious and you the problem, which is a classic sign of gaslighting. It's victimizing.
How many emails are we talking? Exchange?
Well, once I realized I wasn't getting an answer, I wouldn't go over like 2 or 3 emails, but then I would try and go around a corner and ask a different person or make a freedom of information request or go to maybe the Department of Health or the Public Health Agency.
But on a grand scheme, like if you were inquiring about something, you know, for them to label you vexatious when you've sent 1 or 2 emails seems very over the top.
Yeah.
But if it's 1 or 2 emails to 100 different people, then that maybe they make being, you know, because I have to play devil's advocate here and get an understanding. So, like, what are we talking? How many contacts a week would you have had with the health service?
Between the mental health services and the learning disabled services, probably about, I would have been contacting about 2 or 3 people, no more.
Okay.
But this is something that happens across the board. So this has happened to me with the Department of Health when I started asking questions about engagement and why is there no engagement and consultation and evaluation with families who are involved, for example, in serious mental health conditions with their loved ones. Why aren't you asking us?
Are they not peer-led groups?
They're supposed to be peer-led, but when you start asking to be involved and you're somebody like me who asks difficult questions, you'll find that you're not welcome.
Just for anyone that's listening, peer-led as in it's fed back from the users. So the users that use the service give feedback for the service to evolve based on their care and their understanding.
Yeah, and this isn't just a wish list. This is actually a statutory obligation for all of the trusts to do. It's called PPI, I can't remember exactly what PPI stands for, but essentially the Health and Social Care Act states that they have an obligation to, I've written it down, planning, provision, development, consideration, commissioning, delivery and efficacy. So all of those things, I'm totally within my rights to write emails and say,
oh yeah,
are you going to involve me in this? I have a complaint. So I would have, in fairness now, the amount of complaints I have made, huge, but they're all valid complaints because they all demonstrate the brokenness of the system. But the complaints were never upheld. And I wasted hours, hundreds of hours I'll never get back. Even going to the ombudsman, the healthcare ombudsman, they all come back.
What was the general answer you got then? Were you fobbed off?
Yeah.
Would you get here's the statistics, here's last year's, this is so many and this is what we're doing and this is, what would, if you put in a FOIA request for different things, what would you have got back then? Have you ever received any of the Freedom of Information requests? I
got some, but more often than not, I was fobbed off with nonsense, just gobbledygook, very well written gobbledygook.
Well, give us an example of something that you would have asked them for so that we get an understanding.
Yeah. So one of the worst ones was I asked the PHA, the Public Health Agency, about where the money for suicide prevention goes. So they have millions. That's something that annoys me to this day. They have millions and they have a budget to give out to various places in Northern Ireland, and most of that should go to the people who are, I believe, who are at death's door and at A&E and not getting those services. So I found out, okay, first of all, they said that they didn't have it and they sent me to the Department of Health. The Department of Health said they didn't have it. So then I had to go to the information regulator, and it took me, I think, a year or two to get the information. That's the kind of
the PHA fund that they're the money.
Well, do you know, it's a bit of a a spaghetti junction. There's the Department of Health, there was the Health and Social Care Board, there's the PHA, and then there's the 5 trusts. So it's a minefield.
But the trusts, the mental health services and the trust do be funded from one of them.
I think it goes from the Department of Health now straight to the trust. I think that the board used to be an intermediary, but I'm not sure about that.
Okay. So you had requested where the money was being spent
Yeah,
for suicide prevention,
and they wouldn't tell me.
and then you eventually got it. Where was the money being spent?
There were some very dubious places where that money was being sent.
Like,
Rugby clubs and church organisations were getting some.
we need to be careful here now because I've seen campaigns between football clubs and local football clubs lost young ones to. So some people might say, well, investing in the youth and telling them that, you can reach out and where the young ones congregate at football clubs, at church. So there may be an argument for that they're legitimate places but what volumes of the budget are you talking about? Or
I can't recall, but significantly high. And I agree with you that, suicide affects everyone, not just one certain genre of people in society. Unfortunately, it affects everyone. But my argument would be that if somebody like me who was presenting a suicidal was being told there's no money, and then the PHA are sending money to rugby clubs, I would suggest that that's not right. That if the money isn't there to get to people who are at the end of their tether and want to die, then we really need to. Yes, send it to places where people can feel heard, but fundamentally we need to get it to the places where you've got counsellors, psychologists, psychiatrists, the nuts and bolts of how to save someone's life.
No. And this is, Joan, I want to be clear with this because sometimes when we're talking about sensitive subjects like this, we ask questions, and it's not that I'm being prickly about it, because people, when this goes out, they're going to ask that same, and it's being answered now, so it puts that to bed. But if I didn't say, and I'm being honest with you when I say this, I think it's great that it plays in clubs, and I've seen it myself, because there was an actual one that always sticks in my head, and it was like, someone to the right or left, you struggling at the moment, and that was a poster in the actual rugby changing room, and it always made me think everyone was laughing and joking away, but someone to the right. And now I'm not because I always see these things. What happens is somebody says something was 2 million short, and then someone brings up an argument. Well, why did they build around it? There's a bigger plan that I can't really comment on where funds should be deviated. I'm not qualified to say that, but I'm not asking these to be uncomfortable with you. I want to give that when people your version across, but I want people to know that there was a question because we know when these go out what'll happen.
Yeah.
People jump on and say, aye, but this, and they're not taking your point across. But massively, we know mental health services are overworked and underfunded. That is just a given. The NHS is broke now. It is at a breaking point, and they're in the next couple of years they took the £2 billion payment that was to the DUP to form a coalition government, and they increased the pay. They used that money to cover the increase in pay, but that money is only for 2 years, and after 2 years there's not an extra 2 billion for that. So there is a cliff edge coming in the payment in the funding, and there's a crash coming for it, and everyone's aware of this. But to go back to your point, when you started doing these requests, you then got this information, and then did you request more? Because I want to know why the argument initially started. It must have been hard for you to be working in the Western Trust, but then having this.
No, because I worked in different wards in Atnagelvin, and nobody knew that I was asking questions in my spare time. So there was never any, and
it's a big organisation.
It's a
so
huge
you're not
exactly.
You're in a different element. You're talking to a different part.
But the problem I had, and I have received an apology from the Department of Health for falsely labelling me vexatious. That came last year. The
How
health
do you
ombudsman.
know they labelled you that? Did they send you an email to say?
Not only did they send me a letter calling me vexatious, the Department of Health sent a blanket email to every single employee in the Department of Health telling them not to answer any of my emails because I'm vexatious without any evidence or proof. The Ombudsman has come on record.
Who made that call? Have you been made aware of who made that call to send that?
Yeah, Laverne Montgomery, who's way up in corporate. And I absolutely take your point that the healthcare system is suffering from a real dearth of funding. But I must point out that you'll never find any of the corporate upper echelons of any trust or the Department of Health. You'll never find any of those people taking pay cuts or cutting their services. And we don't really know what they do up there in their offices. But I can tell you that the people at the very bottom are suffering from a lack of finances. But you'll have CEOs get golden handshakes and pensions. And it would be interesting. Some of the questions I ask is how much are such and such a person getting at the very top? They're not too keen to cut any funding from them.
Is that not public record?
It would be. There are, if you had the time and the energy to find out where all the money went, you'd realise that it's a lot of the people who think they're important and who make a lot of serious decisions at the very top, they're on great money and they're not suffering the way that people at the bottom are suffering. In my opinion.
I think most societies is built like that, and
Yep.
that's true. But so then there was a blanket email sent to everyone in the department saying not to reply to yours.
Yep.
There must have been a lot of
No,
exchanges you've
I promise
had.
you there wasn't. What I started to do was start asking about where the money's going and where the engagement is. And
Do you think it was your questions, not the amount of questions?
it was my questions, not the amount of questions. The reason I know that is because the Health Ombudsman has come back and in my favour saying they labelled you vexatious without any...
And what did the letter say? That you have been vexatious and we have warned our staff not to?
More or less, yeah. We're not going to respond to you anymore, Miss Corrigan. We find your communications vexatious without any warning, without any examples.
Well, you have said here that you're fiery.
Yep.
Would your emails been very...
No. Because once you start being nasty in an email, they will have ammunition to say you are vexatious.
But there is
you're
ways
abusive.
to be passive aggressive in emails.
I started off in my campaign work very deferential and very much like, making all my P's and Q's right and dotting my I's. And I realised that that wasn't getting me anywhere. So then I just started to say, look, this is how things are. I'm entitled to this. I'm asking you this. You're not answering me. Why are you not answering me? And then it eventually went on to... Every single organisation I've ever challenged has done the same gaslighting approach. We don't like the tone and content of your email, Miss Corrigan. And I'm thinking, I was just asking polite questions. I was just making complaints. If basically what they're saying is, if you complain about us or if you challenge us, you are the aggressor here. So we're going to protect ourselves against you, even though legally they're supposed to not only give the information but consult with people like me and work with people like me who are trying to get information to families.
There is a annual report that the PHA and the health service and all were they just referring you to that, or was that their standard reply, or what was the standard reply? Were you getting any questions answered?
No, I mean, my questions were normally very specific, and they like to be woolly and they like to be vague. That's how they get away with so much. They say, oh yes, well we did this piece of work and we're working on this framework, and then they bamboozle you with flowery language and they never tell you the answer. So the more you go back to them, the more ammunition they have against you, to the point where for years now, the Western Trust have said to me, to protect our staff, you're supposed to only write to this email address. At the moment, my own sister's care, I can't discuss that with any of the decision makers in the trust because they won't answer me. That's my own sister, and that's a violation of her rights. The Mental Capacity Act states that you know, everyone who's involved in my sister's care, who's her family or her loved ones, has a right to speak to what she would have wanted if she could consent. So the trust have just basically said, we're not responding to you. And that's because I had to use legal action against them again in 2022, when she eventually had to go in to live in a care home, where she's very happy, thankfully. But they took away her day centre from her, just like that. All access to all her friends, access to all bus trips out into the community, access to freedom, access to, you know, all her human rights, her disability discrimination rights. They were all just completely annihilated. And that nearly destroyed me. I cried and I cried over that, because I was living in Spain and I was thinking about my poor sister living in a care home, being taken away from her family for a start, but also simultaneously being taken away from all of the other people that she loves and knows and has had relationships with. She's 48. She would have had those relationships since she was 18. And I thought, why are the trust doing this? They would have been doing it to save money or who knows. But it took me 3 months to get that reversed. And thankfully they did finally give her back her daycare, but it wasn't without, nearly destroying me. And the idea that would be, I mean, they talk so much about safeguarding and consultation and best practice. Talk about worst practice. Talk about throwing somebody off a cliff without even gradually taking her away from her daycare. They just cut it like that. And this is a woman who has autism and who needs continuity and needs stimulation, to just put her in a care home and then say that the care home are going to give her activities. But the care home doesn't have the budget for that. And they know that. And one of the most sickening things about this is I challenged it through my local Fermanagh district councillors, and they had an open meeting and they challenged the CEO, Neil Corrigan, to his face. And this was put on YouTube. This was a public meeting. Neil Corrigan is on record having denied that any daycare was taken away from anyone. And he manipulated statistics suggesting that daycare was being attended by about 90% of the learning disabled in that area, when in fact from the day COVID started, the learning disabled had all of their daycare the learning disabled who live in care homes had all of their daycare taken away from them. And that is still the case to this day. As far as I'm aware, my sister thankfully has been given 3 days a week. She was on 5, she's been given 3. And he lied about that, and I saw it and I was furious. So I sent an email to the Department of Health, Peter May, the Permanent Secretary, and the Western Trust's board assigned somebody to investigate Neil Corrigan lying on record to Fermanagh District Council, and lo and behold, they stood by him and the complaint wasn't upheld. So these people...
Because we need to be careful here in the fact that you've called a person a liar and manipulated facts, when we're not aware of the facts, or we're not aware of what he quoted or on what is the real facts, or whether it was a misquotation or whatever. So podcasts are very much one-sided, that you get to have your say. So we are aware of that. But what did they say? The reason they upheld his... What was that... You've obviously told them what it was said and shown them, and what did they say? No, they've upholded that. What was the response to that?
You know something? At that point, I had, after making the complaint, I had to step away from that whole thing. I don't know if I actually read their response, because I was so... A lot of these things are triggering for me, but I had spoken to a journalist about it, and I had asked him to follow up. And what I got back from the journalist in a WhatsApp message was, they're not upholding your complaint, so we're not going to do the story. So that was all I needed to know. Sometimes I don't read the responses, because as you can imagine, with mental health issues and seeing all of this deceit and skullduggery, there are some emails that I don't read, and I just, to protect myself.
Yep.
See, during all this here, with all the emails being sent and all the people you spoke about, was there anybody that you emailed that was actually willing to help you in some way? to give you the answers that you needed or the answers that you wanted?
So what I have found is that within the trust, there's a certain way of working that is maintain the broken system and don't let anybody in to penetrate this ironclad system. There have been some people, and I truly believe that people within the trust want the system to be fixed, and I believe that there are amazing workers within the trust. I've benefited from that. And I believe that there are many workers in charities who want to help me, but they can't. And I believe they're gagged. And I know that MENCAP NI are the main charity for the learning disabled in Northern Ireland, and Inspire are the main charity for mental health. And I have obviously begged them to help me in many issues. And unfortunately, I believe that because they are service providers, because they are involved in very lucrative contracts with the trusts, they just don't come out and sit where I'm sitting and tell these stories, because I think they're gagged. I think that there may be clauses in their contracts where they're forbidden from telling the truth about, or being critical of the trust, essentially. Unfortunately, I have spoken to the CEO of both of those charities and asked them very basic questions as to the absolute, I'm not going to say a bad word, but SHIT show that I see.
She said shit show. It's not Spanish.
I mean, the shit show that I have lived through, the shit show I've seen my sister being subjected to, and people I love and care for, and people I've heard about on the radio, and people I've seen articles about. And I've said to them, you have an obligation to speak out about this, speak out against it, call out the bad services, call out the mistakes, talk about how these wrongs need to be righted. Righted, that's not a right word. I'm an English teacher. And I have found that their response is, I don't doubt that those women want to help. I know that they want to help, because why else would they be working in the fields that they're working? And, fair play to the CEO of MENCAP NI, Gráinne Close, did come out to my sister's care home and visit her and advocate for her. I will give her dues. But essentially what happened then was, once the trust started, coming down heavy on her and on me, and banning me from the meeting, which would have decided whether she can get daycare or not. I was banned from that meeting, even virtually.
You're banned from. Who is your sister's chief primary care? Who's responsible for?
The assistant director of learning disabilities in the Western Trust is Christine McLaughlin, and she banned me from a family meeting, which involved the family, not me, her colleague, and MENCAP NI. And that decision, I asked for that meeting, but I was banned from it. But that's a typical trust thing to do. Unfortunately, Miss Close then...
On what grounds were you banned?
I wasn't given any grounds.
Look, to me, it feels like that you've had loggerheads with these. You've had, obviously, confrontations, and they're like, we're going to have this, but we're not going to have it if she's there, because this is going to go whatever way. Who takes care of your sister's care? Who is the person that they will speak to and talk to?
Oh, well, I mean, that's a family.
So they deal. How does your family feel about the confrontations that you have? Are they in support of it, or?
I don't want to speak for them, because that's not fair.
But it's bound to rock the boat for them at some times, because they're the ones that are at meeting the people, and you may have emailed, or there may be an exchange, and then they're sitting down there trying to have a conversation. I'm just trying to get an idea of the dynamic of that.
Yeah. Again, I understand that conflict between me and the trust can lead to conflict or uncomfortable situations for other people. But the fact remains that my sister's non-verbal, my sister's rights are being exploited. My own parents were lied to by the trust in terms of they said that because of data protection and all of this malarkey, that the only people who could liaise about my sister's future would be the mum and dad. And that's absolutely categorically not true, because the whole family can and should be involved. Even aunts, uncles and cousins and friends can be involved. But because there are certain people who are more susceptible to being bamboozled, and the trust will hone in on any opportunity to bamboozle families. And then you've got people like me who are more fiery and who are more in tune with exactly what the rights are. But of course, I will be labelled, the horrible, wicked, vexatious person. And, it'll be like, well, we need to get rid of her because she's a bad person. But actually, I'm the one who's saying all the uncomfortable things that nobody else wants to say, or maybe doesn't feel comfortable saying. And so be it. If I'm labelled whatever, I have thick skin, I can take it. But I mean, what the trust don't give a hoot about is the nights that I cried myself to sleep feeling that my poor sister's mental health was going to go down the toilet, and her just the idea of her turning into an old woman, sitting in this sitting room all day without, I mean, obviously the family would be taking her out regularly, etc. But fundamentally, she has a right to, her human right is, and her disability rights as well, is to have full access on a par with anyone who isn't disabled. That means access to restaurants or holidays or, whatever she wants to do, whatever she can do. But the trust will, it's not fair for me to say the trust. The trust is a massive machine full of brilliant people, and then some people who make very, very nasty decisions that impact so many people's lives negatively.
Do you think with, all you're asking for is the service that's there and that's available to be given to your sister? And if the service is there, she should be fit to get it. Exactly. But do you think why all these services aren't being give out to certain people is money? So if people that are fit to avail of it don't avail of it, well then they're saving money in some way.
There's probably an argument around that, but at the same time, another thing that really upsets me is that in 2016, it was exposed that the Western Trust had been funneling away over 42 million over 6 years away from the learning disabled, commission services that were specifically for them, funneling it away to other places. Now, I don't know where those other places are. I don't know who made that decision, why, when, who agreed it, but it was secretly done. It was only found out by someone in the Health and Social Care Board. That 42 million, they have admitted to funneling away. They haven't said why they did it. But for all of those years that the learning disabled were told, well, I'm sorry, we can't give you the 6 weeks respite because there isn't the money. That was a lie. Now that was something that demonstrates the fallacy of there isn't enough money. Because there is money, it's about where they divvy it out. And you'll always find, as I said previously, that you'll find the very people at the very top who need their salaries and their bonuses and their benefits, they will never go without. It's the poor, non-verbal people who can't stand up for themselves. And then if they're lucky enough to have a family member who will fight tooth and nail for them, that family member will be vilified, as I have, and will have their communication rights taken away from them. But that 42 million will never be paid back. And I have asked everyone, I've asked the Ombudsman to help me look into where that money went. I've asked the Northern Ireland Audit Office to find out where that money went. And that is essentially abuse of, you could say it's a criminal abuse, of financial abuse of disabled people. Bring me somebody in Northern Ireland in power who is going to find out where that money went and why.
Well, before we go into that, you obviously then, this exchange was going on. You were working in Galvin. You were with an agency in there, and you were working there. Did at any point this conflict between the trust and yourself, did it impact that job?
No, I
No.
mean the daycare problem was in 2022, and I had left at Nagelvin
Okay.
at that point. So, yeah,
And now you've been basically excommunicated from the thing. But to say it, they're not communicating with you with what your sister's care, so they
yeah,
and I don't mean that in
it's a valid verb.
but so, and obviously you're not letting that settle. You want to be involved in your sister's care, and you want to know what's happening, and you want to ask what's happened then after when you had that, when they held that meeting and you weren't allowed to be even virtually or thing. What has happened then since then?
Well, that meeting happened I believe in 2022. It went pretty well. I have to choose my battles because my priority at that point and still is what's best for her. I don't, I have to conserve my energy. So the fact that I have been cut out of communication with these people is just something I've had to park, because there's some things that I can't control. I'm happy to say she was awarded 3 days daycare, and she's there and she's happy. And I was with her yesterday, and she is the light of my life. She is just such a wonderfully pure, beautiful soul. And, the reason I do all this is for people like her. And I see how people like her are treated as non-people, as stupid, as vegetables, as inconsequential. And that breaks my heart, because I've worked with so many learning disabled people, and they are so incredibly intuitive and with great memories and big hearts, fantastic minds, great humour,
There's no doubt, and very rewarding in working with that, and sometimes much more pure than working with people that have much more sinister minds, and I have no doubt in that. You is there any way to appeal that there, or
Well, they're very, very smart, these people. So what they'll say is, because of the volume of emails that you send to various people, what we're going to do is we're going to centralize all your communication to one email address. And basically they're asking me to, we all have rights. So we have rights to complain to the trust. We have rights to make freedom of information requests. So those are rights they can't take away from me. They would if they could. But what they're trying to do is take my voice away from me in all the ways that I could complain or petition or advocate. They've taken my voice away from me in that respect, but they'll give me one email address that I can write emails to. So in other words, they're vetting me. They're vetting my communication, and they're going to count all the emails, which is something that they wouldn't do to you if you wanted to make complaints about anything in your healthcare. You have a right to email whoever you want, but
there's rights, and then they may feel like there's abuse of rights. So if there has been hundreds of thousands of emails,
no,
but
I know what you're saying.
But if we're talking in volumes, and this is what they're saying, so we're not aware of the volume of emails, but everyone's entitled to that right. But rights can be abused, is what I'm saying. So there has to be situations where if they're receiving, like they're paid members of staff, if they're receiving abusive or excessive or thing, that system, that protocol comes in place. But I also am not disguising what they would use yours if you're asking hard questions to maybe questions above the pay grade of the person that's actually at the other end of the email, that you've asked a question and they might be like, oh, I don't know where that goes. And if they go and ask, that door closes on them too. What is the process now? You received obviously an apology at one point to say that you were made aware that this was sent mass, and then you've received the ombudsman was involved in that.
Yeah.
You've obviously reached out then to other figures, political or thing. And what has been the situation there?
Well, if you look at this logically, if the system wasn't broken and if there were people who were working for people like me, if I didn't have to do all of this on my own, if MenCap and if Inspire were asking those difficult questions that I'm asking, then I wouldn't be the one writing all of the emails, would I? There would be, I would.
It is slightly unfair to ask Inspire and MenCap to keep the health service in check as such. They have to work as a partnership because they're trying to supply care to the same people. So there is going to be an overlay, and there's a funding issue, and there's lots more in that. But they're not regulators. They're not there to regulate these people, and it's slightly unfair to say that why aren't they keeping them in check when, it's a regulation issue.
Well, there's also the fact that they're a charity and they both claim to be the voice for people with either learning disabilities or mental health issues. And I think we can agree that there are many, many people who need help, and that these charities are not getting the message through to the trust. So if the charities aren't getting the message through, a lot of the families end up doing all the fighting for themselves, and families shouldn't have to go through what I've gone through and I know many other family members who are either bereaved because they've lost someone or their loved one isn't getting the right care that they need. And I firmly believe that charities have got lost in the whole mess of, am I a charity who's going to advocate for the rights of the service users that I get paid to, help? Or am I a service provider who's actually very friendly with the trust and the Department of Health? So, for example, I can use the example of a man who used to be the CEO of Inspire, which was then called Neve. The friendships that he has with the Department of Health, where I think he's now a private consultant in some ways, the friendships are so questionable in that those contracts that they make, they take away the independent voice of the charity. So the charity is no longer speaking independently for the people who need them. They're service providers, and all the conversation is around essentially money talks. Some of these CEOs are on 150 to 200,000 pounds a year. That's a charity. That's not a charity. That's a business. I'm sorry. So in terms of service providers, yes, they should be service providers if that's what it has to be, but there has to be a point where the issues that I'm talking about today, there has to be a point where someone within the charity needs to sit down and talk about the ugly truth about the lack of funding and the lack of consultation, the lack of transparency, the lack of accountability, and how, not only is legislation being broken, regulations, policies, procedures, guidance, all of these things are being openly flouted. And I'm an English teacher living in Spain, right? Why am I sitting here talking about this and not the CEO of Inspire, the CEO of MenCap? That's a problem, because they
we have named two charities a few times there. That why are they not keeping the NHS and thing? And I have to just be careful here, because we have known of many people that have availed of these charities and have nothing but fantastic things to say. And I think we're sort of in a problem here, for the simple reason is it's the healthcare regulator that's responsible for the funding issues, the lack of the service providing.
Not funding, I'm afraid. The regulator,
where funding is allocated,
yeah,
is a regulator issue. What I'm saying is, it's not to ask of a CEO of a charity to keep in check the NHS as such.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a big ask. And I remember seeing a debate about, you're saying that people have went from high powered positions in charities to high powered positions that are working thing, but maybe because the skill sets are the same, that it's a service user that's in that area, and when that job becomes available, their criteria meets that and their experience meets that, so that they're maybe eligible for a job in private and public care. So sometimes the people will move in them circles that you're like, well, they've moved between a private sector and the public sector, and or the other way about. And
or maybe it's just because of a brown envelope,
or 100% of a brown envelope. But
it's about the friendships that are formed and the alliances and the allegiances. Is that a word, allegiance?
So do you think a big service comes down to the voice of a few people together? Like if there's a few people in them powerful positions and they have a lot of influence, because I know a lot of people have said this, as in, it's a few people making the policy for a lot of people. Is that?
Oh yeah. I mean, there are a handful of people making decisions that are not on the ground. And don't give a flying fuck. Sorry,
sorry.
About the suffering and the absences of need. Sorry, the absences of needs being met. For example, the stress levels that I have seen within families of the learning disabled. People who are barely functioning. Luckily, my sister doesn't require a huge amount of care, and her behaviour isn't what you would call challenging. She is autistic, but she's quietly autistic. Yeah. She doesn't have any... I've seen some, physically challenging situations in families, but I've seen so many mothers and fathers who are just frazzled and are not being offered the respite that they legally deserve, and would be afraid to ask for it, or would be afraid to fight for it.
What is it you would like to see now? What would your if you were to, somebody's to give you a couple of options of things to fix in it, and for a very fragmented, that's a very vague question and a very fragmented system, but what would you want to see in that?
So if I were being given some wishes that I could get granted, it would be for accountability. That is one of the biggest problems in Northern Ireland, because for what I've described today to occur, to continue, there are people who are actively working to maintain the brokenness of the system. In other words, if you look at the post office scandal, some really, really bad stuff happened there, and it was an open secret. It was... Everybody knew that people were innocent, and they were being falsely accused, and they were sometimes taking their lives and often going to prison. And it's only now that it's come out that this is all bad. And even you can see on Twitter, some of the sickening videos of the people in power who knew and who are now saying they didn't know. And so what I'm saying is that...
Do you think there's that same level of corruption in the healthcare as there was in the cover-up in that Horizon scandal?
Maybe not to the same level where people are going to prison, but I would say the level of concealment...
It's worse here because it's mental health we're dealing with.
Well, there are people who have died that could have, whose lives could have been saved. Yes, I totally agree with that.
And do you think that they keep the status quo because it feeds their own personal benefits?
Yes. And I believe that people who I've reached out to and asked for help, for example, recently the Victims Commissioner, Jerry Hanna, I've asked her to help me with the grey area that involves... You know how Muckamore happened, and that was abuse of learning disabled in state care. So that was the Belfast Trust. So I am aware that has happened and is happening at times in other locations in Northern Ireland. Unfortunately, there's a small percentage of the population who are evil and are abusers, and that they will unfortunately get into care jobs. So what I've discovered over the past couple of years is that if you want to report something like that happening, you can't go to the police, even though that person is as entitled to be protected by the police as anyone else on the street.
Why can't you go to the police?
I've gone to the
if something criminally is happening, someone's being assaulted or thing, of course you can go to the police.
Well, here's what happened in my situation. I witnessed negligence in the hospital when I was working there one night.
What level of negligence? What happened?
So in January 2019, I was working a night shift and I saw people who were old and frail left in their own urine. People old and frail calling out for help. Each patient has a buzzer, and they were pressing their buzzer, and the buzzer wasn't being answered in a timely way. So I'd worked at that point for 4 years in the hospital, so I knew that the buzzers are answered within probably 2-3 minutes. The care assistants are supposed to answer the buzzers. So I was assigned to work with one man all night, so I wasn't on the ward, so to speak, doing the rounds, but I pressed the buzzer for the man who was soaked in urine, and I waited and I waited and I waited because I needed help to change his pad. So nobody came. And I had seen these people going out, these care assistants going out for smoke breaks. I'd seen them in the office having coffee and chatting and walking around the ward with their hands in their pockets, more or less. 2 care assistants who really shouldn't have been care assistants at that time. Maybe they just didn't want that job. That wasn't the right job for them, and they just didn't want to be on the ward that night or ever. And I tried really hard to get them to help me, but they wouldn't help me. And this poor man was almost in tears. He was mortified. He was a man who I could see his dignity was really being annihilated, and it was a humiliating experience for him. And I was trying my best to get the situation fixed as soon as possible. And I just couldn't get someone to help me. And finally, after I'd say maybe up on nearly 10 minutes, it took for someone to come and help me. I actually had to go out of the room and run and try and get someone. I found the person who should have been there answering the buzzer. She would have heard it. The whole ward hears the buzzers. She was making toast. And
Did you say anything to her?
I said, I need your help, please. And she just looked at me and looked away. And you're not on the same. You're not employed in the same. They're NHS staff. They were there on their full-time role. You were only in here as an agency worker.
Yeah, okay. And
so
did that look to you like that was a systemic, like that was a norm, or was this a one-off, or what?
I have gone on to find out that it was the norm, unfortunately, on that ward, that care assistants were not doing their duty, which is to answer the buzzers. And they were bullying. Many nurses were being bullied into having to do the tasks of the care assistant, which is toileting. Number 1 would be answering the buzzer, bringing someone to use the loo, or cleaning a bedpan or bringing a bedpan. Those are the things that care assistants, I'd say it's one of their top 3 jobs at night. So finally I got this man help, and we got his pad changed. And yet the buzzers kept going on and on into the night, 11 p.m, 12 a.m, 1 a.m. And people were trying to sleep. And I thought, I was putting myself in their position. They deserve to sleep, and the buzzers should be answered. And I knew that they weren't being answered because they were being ignored. And the nursing auxiliaries were either out smoking or expecting the nurses to do it, and the nurses were expecting the care assistants to do it, or they were busy doing their own jobs. Nurses have a hell of a lot of paperwork to do and a huge amount of responsibility. And it was just a very dysfunctional, toxic situation. So around midnight, I said to the nurse, why is this happening? I knew that wouldn't go down well, but I just felt I can't say nothing here. So I spoke to the nurse in charge that night, and I said to her, this is not right. How can she be making toast when there's a man in intense psychological distress? The toast, she needs to make the toast because the toast might go cold. And I more or less laughed in her face, and I said, are you serious? And so basically my concerns were dismissed. The buzzers continued to buzz all night. When I went on my break, I heard a woman crying out for help. Her buzzer was being ignored. I went to help her, and I just thought, that's one woman I've seen. There are probably throughout the night, there were probably dozens of other occasions when people were either in severe pain or in danger or had fallen. Who knows what could have happened to these people? And of course, having been brought up in a family with someone who's severely learning disabled, I'm just so always aware of, you have to help the people who need help. You can't just leave them when they don't have a voice and they don't have the ability to help themselves. So in every kind of situation where I see a man like that or a woman like that, I think I see my sister. And unfortunately, soon after that, that ward came for me.
Why? What did you do then that made that? What did you do after that shift? Did you complain to someone, or did you?
Well, I knew that having been dismissed by the nurse in charge, I wasn't going to be able to do anything at that time. So,
is there not a protocol in place that if you witness this, that you can report it higher up?
Yeah, and I knew I was going to do that, and I did that. But the protocol that she should have followed was to ask me to make a statement and to independently investigate what I had said had been happening. But she immediately dismissed it all and said it wasn't true. Or if it was happening, it was because A, B, and C. So I went home and I knew that I was going to write the whole account, in the next day or the day after. But what happened was, more or less, when I went home, the new nurse who was coming in for her shift the Sunday morning was bombarded with a big bunch of written and verbal complaints about me. And what a surprise that no complaints had ever been made about me in 4 years until I made a complaint on that ward. So the accusations...
They made a complaint about you. So did you come in? Now, you've said it to us slightly. Did you come in and go, what the fuck's going on here? This is a shit show? Or,
No.
So what did they complain? What did they say that you had done?
So my complaint was simply, why are the buzzers not being answered? This isn't safe.
No, but what complaint did they make about you?
So the complaints that were made about me was, so essentially the way it worked was, I went home, they did a handover, and during that handover, around that time, there were two main complaints that were made about me that I have been made aware of, probably others that haven't been disclosed. One was that I had an attitude, and two, that I was a bad team player. So the trust have never given me any concrete examples as to why I was either of those two things. They didn't give any, as I say, they didn't give any examples, but they did cancel my shift for that night. I was due to work 2 nights in a row. The second night was cancelled because I allegedly was, it's pure retaliation, and it's classic.
But you then complained after that.
Yeah.
So they could say yours was retaliatory, that yours was after they had complained. Had they lodged an official complaint, or because you're an agency, they don't have to actually give you notice, they can just cancel that shift?
Exactly. So I didn't have, they were able to just say, we don't like her, we don't want her back. And so that was communicated to my manager at the agency, we don't want her. But I think they knew that I was going to be writing a formal complaint about...
Had you said that you were going to?
I think I did, yeah. So I think it was a case of attack is the best form of defense. So essentially the plan was to discredit me and to make me the bad guy and to make me the problem. I didn't see that coming. I mean, I knew I wouldn't be flavour of the week, but I didn't see just how harsh the retaliation was going to be. So they cancelled my shift. They made a formal complaint to my agency. They made what was it called? An incident report. Even though there was no incident, they made an incident report. They wrote a joint statement.
What was it?
The joint statement was that, this agency worker has complained that the buzzers weren't being answered. It was very busy. The buzzers were being answered, and essentially, there's nothing to see here.
The complaint was that you complained but shouldn't have complained?
They didn't seem to have a problem that I complained. They just seemed to be saying that I was talking nonsense and that everything's fine. That it was a busy ward that night. Everyone did the best they could. And whenever that man needed his pad changed, we came to him as soon as we could, more or less. So that was, in some ways I wasn't surprised. I mean, because at this stage I knew how the trust works. And I saw then that, as the months went on, some more senior staff became involved in the cover-up. And eventually my agency, unfortunately, didn't support me. I told my agency that these counter complaints had been made, retaliatory complaints, as I called them. And my agency unfortunately said, well, it's not really retaliation, and you aren't entitled to make those complaints about those people. Essentially, she's within a lucrative contract too with the trust, so her obligation was certainly not with me or the poor man in the bed in urine, but it was very much to do with keep your statement as simple as possible, as brief as possible, and as factual as possible, and keep emotion out of it. But what I found her to be doing was, instead of telling me to keep it as factual as possible, there was definitely a sense of, you're not allowed to make that accusation or that observation because it's either irrelevant or it's emotion. And I said to her, well, look, I think it's my statement, and I saw a lot of things which were very questionable and concerned me. So with respect, I'll completely edit it. It was long, so I edited it, and I asked her to highlight all the things in the second version that she didn't feel were appropriate or that I shouldn't be writing.
Why would you speak to somebody about what you can include in your complaint when they weren't present when it happened?
Sorry, can you repeat?
She's telling you what you can and can't say.
Yeah,
she wasn't present when that happened.
She wasn't, and I think that
somebody constructing your complaint that has a financial motive to be working with the NHS is not really a...
Yeah. So she was extremely aggressive with me on the phone, and she said, "What are you talking about? Retaliation? What do you mean? That's not retaliation." And I said, "Well, complaints were made about me." And she said, "No, they weren't." I said, "Well, I've been told they were." "Well, they've been retracted. They've been, the complaints don't exist."
But you weren't allowed to work the second night, so obviously at some point somebody made a complaint to stop you from coming in the second night.
Exactly. But she didn't want to focus on that. She was just saying to me, your account is too long, it's too emotional, I'm not going to submit it. So I think her policy...
Your manager...
My agency manager.
Your agency manager said that they wouldn't submit your complaint because it was too long and emotional.
Exactly.
Who is she to judge that? If somebody makes a complaint about something and there's a procedure to be put in place, if it's long and it doesn't matter what way it is, what way it comes across, that's yours to be made.
I believed so. And I was extremely disturbed by her professional negligence, in my opinion, that the focus here is bad stuff happened, this is the account, I want to write more rather than less, because you never know that a detail that I have included might help the investigation in the future.
But you're blowing the whistle on a lucrative contract for a private agency.
Yeah.
They don't want you. Well, you're rocking the boat.
I was certainly rocking the boat, and this is one of the most... I would say top 3 most successful care agencies in Northern Ireland. So I edited version 1. I submitted to her version 2. I said to her, it's much shorter, but with respect, I'm not editing it anymore because I believe you may be trying to censor me here, and I won't be censored because it's my version, not yours. And her response was, again, she called me, she didn't put anything in writing. And she said, more or less, how dare you question my authority? I've been doing this job for blah, blah, blah years. You're a care assistant. I'm a healthcare manager. How dare you? And I said, look, I'm sorry, but if you're not going to submit it, which is, I believe, was her obligation within guidance protocol, if you won't submit it, I will. And she said, fine. And she hung up on me. So I had to submit it myself, and I did so. And then I found that, well, I was very concerned about me standing up to her, what that would mean for my future with that agency. And yeah, true enough, it went to the point where work was then withheld.
What do you mean withheld?
So I knew that there were many shifts available.
How many hours did you work before you submitted the complaint?
So I would have been doing about 25 to 2 shifts is 24 a week, or sometimes 36. And at that point, I was having never had any problems getting access to work. And then
For how long?
For 4 years.
For 4 years?
Not always with that agency, but
Right. But how long with this agency? How long did you work with this agency?
1 year.
1 year. And in the 1 year, how often would you have not have received 2 shifts a week?
Never. I never had a problem getting work.
And after the complaint, how many hours did you get?
After the complaint, I got some work, and then I moved back to Enniskillen, and I said I'll be looking for work in Enniskillen Hospital, which has also got a huge need for agency workers and workers in general. I was offered 0. I was told there was no work available.
But you weren't having work taken away from you if you were still in Derry?
Exactly. So what was happening was they were then saying to me, you're going to have to drive 55 miles to get your shift.
But to be fair, they hadn't actually taken work away from you then at that point.
No.
They just weren't going to offer you work in Enniskillen where you'd moved to.
Exactly. So then what happened was I found out through various sources that there were endless shifts available in Enniskillen Hospital. And I have those at the moment, freedom of information requests and all the rest. So I then made a complaint to my agency, and I said to them, look, I think you're withholding work from me, and that's a detriment. And I intend to, if you keep refusing to give me work in the town where I'm living, because I can't drive, 55 miles to work a 12-hour shift and then 55 back and then 55. It's just, it's not viable. So I think they knew that, and I think that they were hoping that, they sent me an email saying that we suggest that you try another agency, even though they were one of the top 2 agencies that were getting all of the first refusals for shifts in the hospital. So yeah, I made a grievance. The grievance was ignored, and at that point then I realised that I was going to have to make a formal complaint to the Employment Tribunal based on detriment, having made a protected disclosure it's called. So I was protected legally from any kind of detriment that would happen after that. And I've been representing myself because nobody is entitled to legal aid in the Employment Tribunal. So I've been alone fighting my corner, and they've have their barristers and they have their lawyers and they have their skills. And I have,
how long has this battle been going on?
Since 2019.
2019. There's some might say, look, listen, you had work, they didn't withhold work, you decided to move. It's not their obligation when you sign up in an area to give you work in another area. That, when you applied for the job with them, you were based in Derry and they were giving you work in Derry, and you moved. But it's your firm belief that it's because you made that complaint?
Yeah.
That they did have work, but they refused that?
Yeah. I mean, I've seen...
But if they were going to refuse you work, why didn't they refuse you work in Derry as well?
I suppose they didn't do it immediately, and I moved... Coincidentally, the time I moved was very quick after the complaint was made. So... I don't know the answer to why they didn't. Probably it would look too obvious to just cut me off like that. But I have unlimited written proof that there were many shifts available in Enniskillen. And I wasn't just asking for Enniskillen Hospital. I was asking for the whole of Fermanagh. And I was told it's a very lean period, and we have more workers than we have work.
Well, this is all over COVID and all in and
No,
around
this was before COVID, so that was 2019.
Okay.
COVID happened about a year later.
Okay. And then this has been going on now 5 years. Where are you at with this?
So, the final hearing is set for the 16th of September in Killymeal House.
Has it been adjourned before, or is this the date?
This is the date.
Okay.
It has been a very, as you can imagine, in most cases don't last 5 years.
Yeah.
It has been an absolute shit show. The Employment Tribunal itself is a horrendous experience for anyone to go through as without a lawyer.
And especially when you're not in the country. So you then moved in 19, just pre-COVID. After all this happened, you moved away. Is that correct?
Yeah, I realised that my opportunities for working...
We were closed off to the healthcare anyway.
I mean, because of the defamatory statements made about me that weren't true by those staff. I mean, gossip spreads pretty quickly, and my name would be... I'm not helping myself by going on this podcast, of course, but my name isn't flavour of the month within Western Trust for sure. But I was happy in some ways to see that, that the Employment Tribunal have taken the case seriously, and
well, they didn't throw it out. We're hearing
they haven't thrown it out. And initially, I was just taking on the agency, and a judge read my initial, record of why I was taking this on, and she felt that the Western Trust had vicarious liability.
Oh, so she's included them in the case?
She strongly suggested that I add them, and I did add them. Now,
but that takes a whole different animal then, because the barristers and legal representatives will work for them.
It feels like David versus Goliath. It's been.
And what is the contract worth to this cure?
Sorry?
Do you know how much the contract with NHS is worth to the cure? How much do they...
To the agency?
Yeah.
I don't know. I would say, this agency works over the whole of Northern Ireland in each trust area. So I would say they would be making, probably over $1 million per year. I have no idea.
Right, okay.
They would be...
So it hasn't come till its climax yet that this...
No. But what one of the things that's got me to a point where I'm just despairing is that over the course of the years I have been given documents which show me how much collusion and cover-up has taken place at a very senior level about what happened that night. So I've submitted my formal complaint to both Human Resources in the trust and also Safeguarding. People are supposed to keep people safe.
And is that the standard procedure? Is that... No,
but because my agency manager refused to submit my account, I sent it to the people I thought were best served to hear. It was partly a staffing issue and partly a safety issue. And I had hoped that a robust investigation would take place. I was wrong.
Why? What have you now been led to believe that happened?
Well, Safeguarding didn't even take it on.
But I need to ask this, right?
Yeah.
If you're aware of malpractice or somebody's being neglected or it's neglection, what is the standard protocol for reporting that for an employee or for a member of the public? There has to be a complaints department within the NHS that's the first step of call, but you've went past them. So maybe them people didn't have the framework in place to handle a complaint. They maybe didn't have the authority or fit to investigate it. Because if you went to each of them separately and that's not actually the protocol, what is the protocol for that? Are you aware?
Well, the protocol, if there is no corruption, is that I speak to the nurse in charge that night. She deals with it. It's escalated within the trust in a proper way where people are held accountable, and that's it. But that didn't happen. So I had to go around the scenic route, if you like.
Yeah.
And because I had been doing campaign work over the, I kind of knew a little bit more than maybe the average care worker might. So I knew that I couldn't trust RQIA, who are the Northern Ireland Care Regulator, because I have seen many, many scandals involving them where they have been lacking independence and have too much of an allegiance to the trusts and the Department of Health, because essentially they're a governmental organisation. They don't, to me, show any kind of, as I say, independence. And I went on to actually speak to them in 2020, and I found that they made the complaint disappear. They didn't follow through with what they should have done. They wrote a wee letter to the Western Trust. The Western Trust said, sorry, we won't let it happen again. And everything was buried. And they actually told me that it was an employment matter and that I should deal with it in the tribunal. Whereas this is a care regulator who should have been, looking into the nitty gritty and asking the trust about their investigation report. So I have now within my possession the investigation report. I've also got the interview notes that the investigator made whilst interviewing all of the staff on that night. So they are kind of confidential, so I can't really go into them because of the hearing that's coming up in September. However, I have discovered a huge amount of concealment of the facts, minimisation, suppression of facts.
In layman's terms, closing ranks?
Yeah, closing ranks, and also denial, pure denial of...
But if you accuse people of wrongdoing, that is what they do. This is, they close ranks, they cover up. This seems to be on this ward, this shift, systematic problem, that this is the norm. You're now exposing the light in that. You're going to be quite silenced out the door. The agencies, sometimes that old, the nail that sticks out gets hammered first. You're willing to speak out. You become, some people say that's problematic. We can't work with her. We need to keep this quiet. We have an agency here and we have a good thing going. We don't want this bullshit. That's something to do with NHS. That's someone else's problem. Where does it stop now? So if you win your case at tribunal, it proves that they got rid of you because you spoke out when that's what you're supposed to do. You see wrong. I think that's the innate character of anyone that's supposed to care for people, that if they see wrongdoing, they speak out about it. Care. It's a funny thing that we're talking about care here, and this is what the level of care that we're talking about. What is it you want now? What would you like to see? Obviously, a tribunal in your favour, and then what next? Because it won't be enough to stop the system.
No, and whistleblowers, unfortunately, across the board, across the world, are targeted and discredited, and sometimes their lives are ruined, and sometimes the guy from Boeing, I don't know if you saw, he ended up dead. I'm not suggesting that, I'm hoping that that's not going to happen to me.
Jesus, don't be saying that. And not me or Sean either.
No, I mean...
I'm not joking. He isn't sitting there panicking in the background. But look, listen, whistleblowers, look, this is what people are going to say. There's two things they're going to say. They're 100% with you, or they're saying you're a conspiracy theorist and you're awkward and prickly and we know from previous experience that sometimes the craziest conspiracy theory is the truth, and that's the person whistleblowing, and the easiest way to get rid of a whistleblower is to discredit them before what they say. Get your side in first.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just glad that before this happened, I had 3 years of unblemished,
Because it gives it plays towards the, this isn't something I'd be doing and happening, but this is, when I seen this, I spoke out.
And as well, I think my behaviour stands to me. Because in terms of all of the emails that I have written to get answers and to plead for better services, if there were any of those that were in any way abusive, they would have been able to go to the PSNI and call me a harasser. And if there were any serious incidents that happened that night that would warrant calling me, with a bad attitude or a bad team player, then let's go and look into the nitty gritty of that. But they have nothing. They have absolutely nothing. And I know the truth. And I think that all of the evidence will speak to the truth. And I'm hopeful that the tribunal will see that in September. But will it stop the trust modus operandi of covering up? No, it won't. they'll do it again and again and again. Why? Because the system is made to maintain itself, the brokenness of it.
Well, one thing before we finish up here, I want to say, and I've asked other people that have fought against the system this year too, the personal toll that it takes to be that person to stand and fight when nobody else cares enough to do it. You know, what personal toll is that taking on you?
It's hard to put into words. I think that the dissociation part of my coping go-to is dissociation. So I think I'm actually quite dissociated from a lot of it. But I have some of the years dealing with the lawyers have been hard. The contempt, the lies. I have written a witness statement which nearly destroyed me a few weeks ago. I've had panic attacks. I've had insomnia. I've had tears. I have lost my faith, unfortunately, in a lot of people. I've been afraid. I'm still afraid of September, because I am a little tiny woman from Fermanagh, 5'2", and I'm taking on a system that I don't understand and that I haven't been trained in, and I haven't gone to university. It's employment law is apparently, especially whistleblowing law, is a minefield. So to me, what's going to happen in September is going to be probably one of the most defining parts of my life. It's going to crystallize everything that I've been fighting for to try and help people. And I don't want to, if I lose, like, that'll be me. I'll probably never fight for anything ever again. There's part of me which feels like this is my moment to see if truth and justice will prevail. Are they strong enough? Is the corruption and the lies and the deceit and the intense multi-organizational cover-up, friends keeping friends in jobs, friends hushing things away, can one person actually use the truth and the concept of justice to in any way penetrate that absolute steel wall above her? And my hope is yes, because that would then set a precedent of case law. I believe it will be the first whistleblowing healthcare case in Northern Ireland, because I haven't been able to find any others. And they have offered me money to settle, and I have said no.
You've been offered a sum to settle?
Yes.
Can you disclose that sum?
Probably shouldn't.
Okay.
It might be confidential.
Is it a substantial sum? Well, you haven't signed an NDA, you haven't accepted it, so it's not. But it just for your case going forward, I don't want to hurt it. But was it a substantial sum of money?
It was a couple of years of my rent. Yeah.
So, like, some might say that's evidence enough. Who would offer money to cover, or who would offer money for somebody to go away for something that didn't happen?
Yeah. Every piece of evidence I have is so stellar that my case is ironclad. The only way I will lose this case is if it's a point of law that I haven't been able to argue, or if there's corruption. I want to take this forward for the man who was left soaked in urine. I want to take it forward for my sister who can't speak for herself and who is open to abuse left, right and centre. I'm not saying she's subjected to it. She's receiving fantastic care from everyone around her. However, there are some bad people in the world. And one of the things that I think is important to talk about is I have evidence that there was concealment of abuse. That is a crime. I have contacted the safeguarding head of the PSNI and I've said, I want you to listen to me. And she told me, not my problem. I've then gone to the Victims Commissioner and I said, I want the police to take my statement. She's gone to the Assistant Chief Constable Henderson, who has come back and said to her that we don't think what she's saying is a crime. But how can he say it's not a crime if he hasn't taken my statement yet? So I'm now at a point where even the police won't listen to me. And I'm wondering, is that because the police are working in cahoots with the Department of Health to keep people's reputations clean, or to silence people who might say that, state abuse is abuse and is a crime? Because there seems to be a differentiation in Northern Ireland society around you can't abuse someone in your house or in a cafe or in a football stadium. That's abuse. You'll be arrested. But if some abuser wants to do it in a care home or a hospital, then that's not really our job. That seems to be what the police are saying to me. And I've written 6 begging emails to Assistant Chief Constable Henderson, and I've said to him, I want you to hear me. This is the long story of what's happened. I have evidence of collusion and cover-up. That's a crime. I want to tell you about what I saw that night, and I don't know why you won't listen to me, and who's going to listen to me? And he has come back to me via the Victims Commissioner and said, ring 999, which is nonsense.
It's a weird response to receive from a Deputy Chief Constable. Look, there's a podcast could be had again about the outcome and what's happened. My one worry is the faith that you put that there will be justice in this. From some of the experiences we've received, there's not always justice where we think we'll find it. I hope you don't put so much on it that if the ruling doesn't go your way, that it has a detrimental effect on your own health. I want to wish you best, and I believe at the bottom of it all, and I don't know, and I have to be honest, I don't know how much of it all I'm in or what. There's some of the things I'm like, well, maybe this was a scenario, but I do believe that there's people that's close ranks. I do believe at the bottom of it all, it's from a caring perspective, and I think it was your vocation, not your job, and that's the problem with the care industry. It's a vocation. People should want to do it that have the attributes to do it. Mm-hmm. And first and foremost, be caring. Where there's so many people in them jobs, it's not. So I want to thank you so much for coming over. I want to thank you for telling it. We will be checking back in with you. Mm-hmm. We'll be doing a follow-up that you'll be fit to find exclusively on our Patreon down the line. And I want to thank you very much for coming over.
Thank you for hearing me.
Thank you very much
for having me.